welcome back. This is session 3, day 1 of 1 for hearing stream 10. I'd like to welcome Mr. Rowlands. Thank you from Greytown Heritage Trust to the table. Do you have a copy of your notes at all?
Want it there? Yes.
If all the panel could have one, that would be very useful. Thank you. Rebecca could do it. Welcome. Over to you.
Thank you. I won't introduce the trust because I think most people know who we are and how we function. However, on the written part of the oral submission, I have included an introduction. As an opening observation, the Greytown Heritage Trust notes that there's unsurprisingly and appropriately repeated reference to the design guide. This is a significant chaperone, but we feel it needs to be observed that it's often too broad and applies one solution to 5 centres with different functions, architecture, aesthetic sensibility and histories. The Greytown Trust suggests that the document is on occasions too generic, defining rules of heritage precinct. In terms of consultation, the Heritage Trust recognises and is grateful for the consultation extended by South Wales Rapid District Council, and we'd like to foster that practice and strategy into the future. So there are three major areas that we wanted to address from our original submission. Sign R8, a beginning point. We recognise the officer's observation of historic signage and archival photographs of 1900 to 1926. However, our argument would be that this is possibly not a useful comparison or simulation. The contemporary context is to be sensitive to revealing or celebrating architectural detail and character. In the era quoted by the officer, the architectural elements were simply a given and of no immediate aesthetic or historic context. So the signage served a different purpose in a different manner. Greytown partly trades on its heritage ambience, not simply on its commercial exchanges. The question of digital signs probably prompts greater interrogation in our view. The officer cites observations of Masterton's Queen Street as illustrating there not being, and I quote, a significant desire from retailers to have digital signage in wider rapid town centres. It's possibly an uncomfortable comparison of centres. Masterton hosts businesses of a very different nature to those of tourist-oriented Greytown. Currently, in Masterton's Queen Street, there are 10 vacant retail units. Retail operates differently and addresses footfall accordingly. The officer's comment also infers a persistence of a particular promotional style over a period of time, and we'd probably argue that's conjectural. Greytown Heritage Trust persists in its premise that the centre design guide is not specific enough and needs greater granularity for designated heritage precincts. This is not an argument precluding digital signage, but pointing to need to clarify its employment. Signs S3, recognising the decision of the officer in respect of signs, Greytown Heritage Trust would like to champion greater clarity and robustness about signs not going beyond the designated property. There's anecdotal evidence that that has happened on occasion. This, in the Trust view, needs to be clearly stated. And finally, signs S9, the Heritage Trust suggests that the Centre Design Guide document, as I've already said, is on occasions too generic in defining rules around illuminations in a heritage precinct. The issue of lighting on signs is one that broaches not just character and heritage, but also the Wairarapa's celebrated Dark Sky Reserve, a strategy underlined by the International Dark Sky Association and the Royal Society Te Aparangi. To quote SWDC's website directly, the ambition is to, quotes, make sure they, lights, are focused better on what needs to be lit. Greytown Heritage seeks broadening there to include both light directed upon and self-illuminated signs. This very issue formed part of the dialogue about Woolworth's initiative with the Fresh Choice planning ambition. Greytown Heritage Trust notes that the officer fails to justify why the original Greytown Heritage Trust submission on this matter was rejected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Panel members, any questions? Craig?
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Rollins. I've got a couple of questions, if you don't mind. With rule sign R8 and rule sign 3 and S9, what are the changes that you're wanting this panel to make?
I think that what we seek is greater detail and greater clarity.
On what?
Well, so on R8, for instance, I have to look at the, so it's here preempting the possibility of digital signage and what would be acceptable in the context of its presence. You know, the officer makes the point that in Masterton there is will to employ this, but that's very much of this moment and in a different place.
Yes. Mr. Rollins, what's your understanding of the consenting requirements for digital signs that R8 introduces?
I can't answer that.
Okay. Well, let me put a proposition to you.
Sure.
As I read R8, digital signs are not permitted as of right. They need a consent always.
Yep.
As a restricted discretionary activity as a minimum, and that requires them to comply with 10 standards. And if they don't meet those 10 standards, then they trigger to a more onerous activity status, fully discretionary, where everything's on the table, everything can be considered. What's the Heritage Trust concern with that approach?
So, as I understand it, generally what the concern is about the bleed from digital and lit signage. I'm not sure because I haven't been across that level of detail.
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm the mouthpiece.
What do you mean by bleed?
Light bleed.
Light. Yeah.
Yeah.
Village.
Okay. Right. Let's. Okay.
So could I?
Yes.
So matters of discretion under Rule 8, number 5, the extent to which the light will contribute to sky glow and adversely affect the quality of viewing of the night sky. Do you feel that matter of discretion would actually address your concern about bleed? So that's actually a matter of discretion. Yes, it's already in that rule. Is your main concern around detriment to the International Dark Sky Reserve status?
That's one of them. And the other is, I think, the kind of aesthetic experience of heritage.
And so just matters of discretion again under Rule 8, number 2, is effect on character and amenity values.
Anyway.
So that in Rule 8, I would suggest that maybe your concerns are addressed in the proposed district plan as notified on that.
And also perhaps for standard 11, which deals with illumination of signs, and there's a standard there that signs must comply with the standard for outdoor artificial light and glare. If the proposal doesn't comply with that standard, it's no longer restricted discretionary, it then becomes discretionary activity.
Yes.
So is that enough clarity?
I look, from my perspective, that's enough clarity.
Okay.
I mean, I think the premise of the trust would be that there are examples where that's not exercised.
Well, do you
That's
take
currently, isn't it?
it's currently?
Currently, so with these,
Yes, and so there's,
with the new district plan, the proposed district plan.
yeah, all I'm saying is that's probably what's prompted that response from the trust.
That's all right. No, that's fine. It would seem that on that basis, Mr. Rollins, that the proposed plan is dealing with those issues. Yes,
Agree.
yeah, okay. And really, you're supporting the proposed plan in that sense, then.
Yeah.
Yes. And similarly with S8. Sorry, not S8.
S3.
Not S3. The heritage sites rule.
At the sign S3, standard 3, the maximum height above ground
No,
level.
it's not
No?
S3. It's heritage.
All right.
Might be rule 9. Signs affixed to the exterior of any scheduled building, heritage building. And the entry level for those is fully discretionary activity, so always going to require consent. Yeah. It's in the yeah, I think 8.
Okay.
No, that's all from me. Thank you.
No other questions? You've been fine today, and I hope we may have heard from the panel may give you some reassurance in regard to your submission or the trust submission.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. Our next submitter is Horticulture New Zealand. It's online and Lynette Wharf. If you'd like to come up to the table, Wharf. And welcome, Ms. Wright.
Thank you. Tēnā koutou.
Who will be leading? Yep. So over to you, Ms. Wright.
Thank you. I have a summary of my hearing statement, which I emailed through just this morning. Would you like?
Sorry, do you mind just giving us a minute? We've just received the email. So just to
Sure.
allow us a second to open it up. Panel, the email came through at 1:14. Apologies. Okay, oops, just lost mine. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So just referring to my summary of hearing statement, I will read through the hearing statement if that suits the panel. The summary, I'm sorry. Right. So tēnā koutou, my name is Charlotte Wright. I'm employed as a Senior Policy Advisor by HNZ, Horticulture New Zealand. My qualifications and experience are set out in my evidence provided earlier. Ms. Lynette Wharf, Consultant Planner, is here with me and will be appearing on behalf of Horticulture New Zealand also. Firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to appear in front of you today. We do really appreciate the opportunity to do this. for our growers. First of all, just note the Council Officer's hearing summary statement for noise, which I have read, and her response to the Horticulture New Zealand hearing statements. I'd just like to highlight a couple of matters for the hearing panel, if I may. So firstly, around the timing for the use of audible bird scaring devices. So I have been in touch with Jamie Burns at JR's, which is one of our largest growers in the Wairarapa. She has commented that in terms of their operation, they do not use bird scarers anymore since they now have their orchard under cover. However, before they had those crop protection structures, they did have a need for them and had approximately 4 devices per 100 hectares. But I guess the point of raising that is that while this operation doesn't have audible bird scaring devices, they've gone to crop protection as an alternative. Just noting that the timing in terms of bird activity, she has advised us that the birds are active 1.5 to 1 hour before sunrise and 1 hour after sunset. So the current rule proposes a time limitation of use between sunrise and sunset. So just noting growers' observation in terms of bird activity, 1.5 to 1 hour before sunrise and 1 hour after sunset. I do not have evidence on exactly what the proportion of damage that might happen in that time before sunrise and after sunset, but just commenting that it has been observed as occurring by that grower. And then, of course, there may well be other growers that use audible bird scaring devices, but I've not been able to conduct a survey on this, and noting for the future that there may be others who choose to use these in the future. Just also to note on the seasonal worker accommodation. So just noting the Council Officer's statement that the accommodation contains habitable spaces and should therefore be included in the definition of noise sensitive activity. Horticulture New Zealand and growers, I think, acknowledge the need to provide suitable accommodation for seasonal workers who are coming here to work on horticultural operations. Very aware of that and keen to provide the appropriate care for those workers. Just like to draw the panel's attention to some evidence that was provided, a grower statement that was provided previously as part of Hearing 3 Rural Zones, and that was from Jamie Burns for Horticulture New Zealand, who was the grower I referred to earlier. So she just noted that the nature of the accommodation does need to be purpose-built for those workers. There is a scheme which governs the use of that seasonal worker accommodation, and that's administered by the Ministry for Business, Innovation and Employment. So they're not enterprises, I've put there, apologies. So there are already, regulations around ensuring that the worker accommodation is appropriate. And she just pointed to the Building Act and the Residential Tenancies Act and independent third-party audits. So very much aware of the need to provide fit-for-purpose accommodation that meets workers' needs. So any additional requirements for insulation, which may be required if they are classified as a noise sensitive activity, that may of course incur additional costs, which is possibly unnecessary, or we would consider as unnecessary given the other regulations. Yes, the other thing just to note is that the in our view, I guess the seasonal worker accommodation is provided just for seasonal workers only. It's not provided for general accommodation for any other purpose. So the workers that come and stay there would be sort of aware of coming to live within that productive landscape and surrounding sort of noises and things that happen in that landscape. So we feel that there would be a sort of an expectation or acceptance, I suppose, that there will be some perhaps higher levels of noise than there might be in other areas, and that their accommodation is that's sort of living within a productive landscape. So it doesn't make sense, I guess, in terms of that understanding that they have of where they will be residing, to classified as noise sensitive. That's the end of my summary statement. Thank you again. Would you like to hear from Lanesh or any questions?
Just an indication, Councillor Plimmer has a question for you.
Yeah, hi Charlotte. Thank you for your evidence here. I just want to test a couple of things you said. You used the term appropriate care for workers and meets workers' needs for accommodation. I'm interested to understand why you would think it is appropriate for seasonal workers to have less protections and accommodation than any other person.
I absolutely acknowledge that seasonal workers do need to be have suitable accommodation. However, I guess what I was getting at there is that they are living in an environment that is inherently noisy, and would understand that that is the where they will be residing. There's also a lot of advantages, I suppose, to them being on site in terms of having the appropriate sort of pastoral care from their employers. So we'd certainly like to encourage that to continue without sort of restrictions that may discourage that, I suppose. But no, I absolutely agree that they need the appropriate protection. I guess also point to the Building Act and the MB oversight of the scheme, and also Horticulture New Zealand created some guidelines which encourages employers to consider a range of matters in the design of the seasonal worker accommodation. So there are a number of other matters that are considered in there, but yeah.
I'm not sure you sort of answered my question as to why is it appropriate for one class of person to have lower standards of accommodation than another person. Why does Horticulture New Zealand feel that it is appropriate that seasonal workers, who a large number of them are transit should have less standards of accommodation or less standards of protection within their accommodation than any other person?
Absolutely. I guess the other point I suppose the other point to note is that my understanding is that if the accommodation is classified as noise sensitive, then that accommodation would be subject to, I guess it would be saying that it needs to be insulated from noise effects from, say, other horticultural activities. However, I guess those workers are living on a horticultural operation and would have that understanding of that. So I guess it just seemed a little bit strange, but absolutely agree that they should be, protected from noise to the extent that it's, I guess, unusual in a rural environment. But within a rural productive environment, there will be a certain amount of noise that is expected. So in terms of living there, I guess they're living within that rural environment and understand that. So we'd expect a certain level of noise beyond what others might experience in other types of accommodation, perhaps.
So would you agree that it's something we should be striving for to make sure that those workers, from what you've just said, that those workers have the most ability, obviously, to rest and get ready for the next strenuous day of work?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I would expect that if there was a noisy, if there was an issue that that the employer is aware of in terms of noise, that they would be able to go under the guidelines that have been provided by Horticulture in New Zealand. They could consider that and potentially provide for that, those requirements for rest. But yes, I mean, workers should be able to get rest. Absolutely. I guess they might have noise happening on their own orchard that they're working on. So I don't know how much you could exclude that noise, and that noise can continue to occur sometimes during rest periods. The other thing, I suppose, to note is that sometimes seasonal workers might need to rest during the day, or not need to rest, but employers might want to keep seasonal workers out of the hot sun in the middle of the day. So they might suggest that they rest in the middle of the day. But at that time, the orchard activities would still be occurring, and I'm not sure that they would be able to avoid those sounds from their orchard that they are staying at during the day. So
I think that's probably. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions from the panel? That's right.
I've got a small question. In between the evidence submission presented and what you've tabled now, we talk about the audible bird hearing timing. We have a desire for half an hour before and after sunset, but you state in your evidence 1.5 to 1 hour before sunrise and 1 hour sunset. So where are we looking for this to land? Are you still looking for this to be part of it?
We are still looking for the half an hour before sunrise and the half an hour under sunset. The reference to the 1.5 to 1 hours before sunrise and 1 hour after sunset was from a specific grower that we've just talked with recently. So I suppose I will refer to Lynette, if I can, in her presentation in terms of what other councils, what's been sort of accepted in other council plans. But yes, I still.
Yeah, I think it is a point that Ms. Wharf has raised as well. So maybe it's an opportune time to. Thank you very much, Ms. Wright.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I'll just respond to that while it's alive. The scope of the submission is half an hour before and half an hour after. So while a grower may have identified that activity occurs beyond that half an hour, I don't see scope within the submission to go beyond the half hour.
So are you aware of a concept called civil twilight time?
I know it's used in aviation. Yes.
There is very simple tables to measure. So it's just...
Yes, I am aware that there is that concept. But I think sunrise and sunset, you can get data on timing so readily these days.
Yeah.
And as Ms. Wright indicated, we've had this discussion over the timing of bird scarers with many councils around the country, and increasingly they're making it half an hour before and half an hour after because of the bird activity. So this isn't precedent setting in terms of what's being asked for in Wairarapa on that score. I haven't actually prepared a written statement, but I thought I would respond to the matters raised in the officer's summary, if that's an appropriate way. I'll try to be brief. So one of the first points was the issue around noise P1 and the use of the term receiving environment, which I identified was not defined in the plan or described. The reporting planner has said, well, it's a well understood term. Yes, it may be understood by planners, but a lay user looking up the plan might have no idea what's meant by receiving environment. So my view is that you're looking at the zone, and the objectives are all about what happens in the zone. The objectives don't raise the concept of receiving environment. It's raised in the policies. So there's an inconsistency there. So I've sought that it be linked to the zone in which the activity is happening, not the receiving environment.
Is that at a policy level or is it rule level?
It's at the policy level, P1.
Okay.
So it says enable the generation of noise from activities that maintain the predominant character and amenity of the receiving environment by controlling the types of activity. Now, all the rules are linked to the character and amenity of the zones. So I think we need to make sure we're consistent in how that's being applied. In terms of crossfan.
Just before we move on, has you provided alternate wording for
Yes.
clause A?
Yes, I have.
Is it, you don't list all the zones though, do you?
No. So what I've suggested in my 9.2 of my evidence, I list the changes I sought, and I've sought that delete receiving environment and replace the zone in which the activity occurs.
Yep. Okay, thank you. That's clear.
I think we've addressed the bird scarer half hour before sunset. The other matter with the bird scarer rules was the control of the number of devices, which has been rejected. Now, a number of plans don't specifically include the number of devices, because what they're saying is you need to meet the noise standards. Now, for instance, a persimmon orchard might place the bird scarers actually underneath the canopy. Therefore, the mitigations of how the noise travels is quite different to if it was out in the open. So I think you need, if you're focusing on the noise at limits being achieved, a limitation on the number of devices is not necessary. And it really depends on the orientation. Is the device away from, toward, what's the contours of the land? There are so many matters that influence how that noise level is achieved that you don't really need that limitation on number of devices if you're focusing on that noise limit.
So this S3?
S2, 2D.
2D.
And I could give you examples of plans that haven't included a number of devices.
It is on page 19 of the chapter.
And voice, yeah. Okay. What's your recommended change there? So
We delete.
delete D.
Mm.
Just trying to. You haven't done a track change version though.
No, I didn't do a track change version.
Could you do that?
Yeah, I could do a track change version.
Would be useful.
That's all right.
We did actually ask in our minutes, procedural minutes, for track change versions,
Sorry.
but also a section 32AA as well.
Can I just ask you a question on that? If you
Yeah.
limit the number of devices, so it basically says here, each audible event shall not exceed 3 sound emissions from any single device. So what, if you could say at the moment there's 1 per 4 hectares. If you say there's no limits on the number of devices, how will, you could have these things just going continuously.
No, because you've also got in a noise limit that shall apply. And that noise limit applies regardless of how many devices, shots or whatever.
Yeah, but that's
Not,
that's per firing of them.
no, that's an overall noise limit. So you cannot exceed the 65 dB LAE.
With that, then what's the justification then to have only 3 sound emissions per gun?
That's I think that's more about the frequency in terms of exposure to people rather than the sound limit.
Yeah, and that's my point though. If you don't have a limit on the number of devices instead of 3 per gun per 4 hectares, you could end up with an unlimited number of discharges.
No, but you've still got to meet your sound limit.
Yeah, but what you just said was the
Yes.
issue of a bang as opposed to.
I think maybe we actually need a little bit more advice
From Mr. Aiden.
from Mr. Arden, yes, on.
We'll, you made, the point that
Yeah.
you made, Ms. Wharf, I think we might direct some further evidence on that and maybe some conferencing.
And if need be, we could get our acoustic expert to provide comment on what Mr. Arden provides.
Yes.
Ms. Wright, that would be appropriate? Yes, you heard me. Yeah, yes, yeah,
I think that would be really useful
I think that would be helpful.
for the panel. And also you will be providing us too with the track changes. Yes, thank you.
You're not challenging 2A, are you?
No,
I mean, the noise limit.
no, the noise limit is very standard across all district plans in terms of bird scarers. There is a variety of measurements that some use an LMAX, some, but the LAE is a fairly common measure for the impulsive type of noise that a bird scarer is.
Certainly,
Yeah.
there's been a move away from LT into LA.
Yes.
Okay.
So the other point that I raised was regarding the noise installation for frost protection devices. If a new residential activity, a new house, people are sleeping, is within 300 metres of an existing frost fan. And that because if they want to build within 300 metres of an existing frost fan, that they should be required to have noise insulation. And the purpose of this is to try and mitigate the potential for reverse sensitivity effects in the future. Now, both the planner and the acoustic consultant have rejected that, but it's something that has been introduced through the Environment Court cases in Marlborough and Huranui, that the court saw it as appropriate that if you're building within 300 metres of a frost fan, that you should put in acoustic insulation for the sleeping areas.
So permitted activity with a standard requiring that, or
Yes.
a consent requirement, which
It would be part of the consent requirement for a new house, for the dwelling.
house is permitted. Would it no longer be permitted if it's within 300 metres, or would it be the addition of a performance standard
It would be a performance standard, yes.
requiring it insulation to achieve a standard?
Yeah, it would be very similar to your insulation standard for your state highways.
Yes.
Did you say there was a court ruling on this?
Yeah, the Environment Court has considered frost protection devices at some considerable length in both Marlborough and Huranui. And the decisions out of those, and I can give you.
Could you give those to the officers so they can?
Yeah.
To us?
Yes.
That would be
Yeah,
really good to, useful to know.
Again, this is the track change document will be useful.
and that's under S4, is it? No.
Yes.
Yes, it's under S4 that you're talking about this, yeah. Yeah, that could be included in the track changes too.
And then the other change was regarding seasonal worker accommodation, and Miss Wright has spoken on it. My comment on this is that the additional seasonal worker accommodation was sought by Waka Kotahi in terms of the state highway, but inclusion of seasonal worker accommodation as a noise sensitive activity goes way beyond the state highways. And I have not read there's nothing in the section 32 or any cost benefit that says, okay, if we include this in here, what is the justification, the costs, because it will add a considerable cost to establishing seasonal worker accommodation. So I have not yet seen any 32 or cost benefit analysis that goes beyond. I can understand Wakatotahi, but what are the wider implications of including it in that definition, and what's the justification?
So you heard my questions.
Yes,
Same question.
yeah, I understand what you're saying, but again, it is a balance, okay? What as a community are you wanting to do in terms of being able to provide for this? Is it appropriate? And that's where the cost benefit analysis will look at the very question you've asked.
What you're saying then, Ms. Wolf, is that is the scope for providing the additional wording and the definition of noise sensitive activity came from NZTA
Yes.
to control the impacts of noise from the highway on seasonal worker accommodation. Did NZ Hort lodge a further submission?
Yes, yeah.
Opposition to
In opposition to that, yes.
if one was to go to the definition to the submission of NZTA, is it possible to understand that they've ring-fenced that in terms of highway noise only?
I would have to go back to their specific submission. I don't think that they did, but I would need to check. But like, it may be appropriate that it's ring-fenced to only the state highway, but the implications are that by adding it, you're bringing in a range of other.
And you're saying there's an unintended consequence as far as that goes in relation to matters other than highway noise. Okay. And are you saying that we won't find a section 32 assessment for that?
Not that I've found.
Okay.
Because it was recommended through the 42A report, and there isn't any analysis attached to that.
Should be a 32AA attached to the 42A, either adopting the submitter's 32 assessment, which is NZTA, or the officer's own 32AA. I'm looking at Mr. Horrell because he's recording a lot of these matters for the panel to ratify at the end of the hearing. So we just need to understand if there was sympathy for this matter in terms of the Hort submission, what's the way in which the wording would be changed to not capture seasonal worker accommodation other than the state highway type stuff? Have you given any thought to that?
No, I haven't, but it would be quite difficult because you're including it in a definition, but only in respect of the state highways.
Yes.
Whether you qualify it in the definition,
You understand why I asked?
oh yeah.
There may be an appetite from the panel to adopt the red line changes that the officer has recommended based on the NZTA submission, which is a rejection of the further submission from Port New Zealand.
Yes.
But it could possibly be an accepted part if it was a carve out for want of a better term.
Well, just looking at the definition, there are some carve-outs like any educational activity, teaching areas and sleeping rooms only. So there's already a bit of a carve-out. And any healthcare facility, again, a carve-out rooms used for overnight patient care. So the definition has already got some carve-out. So it could.
Carve-outs are activity-based, aren't they?
Yeah.
The carve-out that you're not suggesting, but I'm putting to you, would relate to the spatial extent of the seasonal worker accommodation in relation to a state highway.
Yeah. Yes, it could be
Inclusive.
and instead of having it included in A, it could be a new point E, seasonal worker accommodation in proximity to the state highway.
Okay, understand. Yep. So there's ways and means if the panel was of a mind to.
And I think that would be an acceptable solution if it was a standalone point, specifically in response to Waka Tahi.
Yes. Just in terms of a straight drafting exercise, would you be happy to liaise the officer on that?
Yes, certainly.
On a without prejudice basis to the panel's position and the officer's position, just as a straight drafting exercise.
Yes. Sorry, the officer for this one was
Katie?
okay, right.
We will capture that in the actions at the end of the hearing. Probably won't. We may or may not issue a minute, but you can take that as a verbal instruction.
Yes, I've noted it.
Good. Okay. Thank you both very much. Appreciate your time. Now come
I change hats.
switch your hats over. Thank you Ms. Wright, for your time this afternoon and your evidence as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now Ms. Wolf with your AAA hat on.
Well, I don't think this one will take the time because the officers have come back. The main issue in terms of the AAA, that's Agricultural Aviation Association, was regarding the exemption for the conservation areas. And the officer has recommended in the report, find the right one, that at the moment, just so the panel are clear, in the noise standards, there was in your at the beginning of the rules, there were
A rule box.
the rule box, is that how you're referring? There was an exemption.
I got myself into trouble this morning.
There was an exemption for D, but it was only in the general rural and rural lifestyle zones. And it meant that any activity in the natural open space zone or conservation activity was not captured by that exclusion. And so because of baiting and things on the conservation estate, and it was important. And also, anyway, so the officer has recommended in addition, I know, and I think that is appropriate. I do notice it uses the term limited duration, and I think that's a little bit open-ended, but I don't think there's probably scope within submissions to deal with that.
Might have been listening to what we said this morning.
Have you already discussed that? In terms of the natural open space zone, because of section 4.3 in the RMA, which allows for activities in the conservation estate, it actually is probably provided for.
Yes, we just thought that that term had invoked a little bit of a discretion.
I think it's. Have you had any thoughts that you might?
Really, no. We've left it with the officer to come back to us on that. But again, the officer's there to, without having directed conferencing, to liaise with the officer if you've got any thoughts on that, so long as it's in scope.
Well, that's what I'm concerned about, is that I'm not sure that too many submissions deal with the actual wording of limited duration. What I did do in my evidence is I have actually for AAA, for my evidence for Helicopter Association, in terms of, because they had submissions on this, I've actually reworded that clause D because I felt it was rather muddly. So you will find in my evidence for Helicopter Association a proposed rewording for that clause.
Association
Yeah.
submission that we actually had the discussion about, I think, as opposed to NZ AAA.
Mm.
What's the rule number or standard number?
Well, it's in the box.
Up in the box,
Yeah,
of
it's
course.
L. It's the
L.
last one.
Yeah.
The new one in L. Yeah.
That's right. But also the definition of helicopter landing pad, helicopter landing areas.
So is that the other submission?
Yeah.
That'll come when we'll do after your break.
What I was going to suggest, because I think your colleagues are also in the room now, I think going back to NZ AAA and the submission on that, do the panel have any more questions for that? I think it's probably a good segue to bring in.
Oh, you want to go straight on it?
Because yes, and then we can take a break if everyone's comfortable with that after the New Zealand Helicopter Association.
We were going to have a little bit of a briefing, but
No, that's fine. We can our schedule for a break. So if you
that's well, do you guys want to come up here or move over so I can introduce my colleagues and I'll get the right piece of paper. So I'll get you. So what I will get you to do is describe. So maybe I'll get my team to introduce themselves. So, and just give me a moment to get my right.
Sure. Hello, my name is Ray Nelson. I'm the new executive officer at the New Zealand Helicopter Association.
I'm Bill Rainey, and we've just recently purchased amalgamated helicopters on Manchester Road about 6 months ago.
I'm Williams, owner of Warwick Helicopters.
And the reason.
Record will need this formalised in terms of the attendance record.
Oh, right. Okay.
Can you email through to Ruth after the hearing, just the names and positions of the three gentlemen? Yeah.
I think Ray was on the attendee list.
So we had myself and Bill was on the attendee list.
It's just Mr. Williams that we didn't have. I don't think.
They're under the radar.
So I don't know, you obviously had some discussion this morning about helicopter landing areas. And I think that there seems to be different interpretations of what the definition of helicopter landing area may actually involve. And maybe that's the place we should start, because if we can resolve that issue, it may resolve some of the other issues. But the big concern is that at the moment there are a number of helicopter activities that happen around the district that are very intermittent. They only happen on a very infrequent, limited duration, whatever the term, that do not use a, they may start at a depot or a base, but that they're going out, say, taking, I'll get the guys to describe them, but say if you were taking out a technician to a cell phone tower to repair the cell phone tower, you're not going to be landing at the cell phone tower at a designated base. It is but it is still a helicopter landing area in our estimation, interpretation of the definition. Now, if that landing area up by the cell phone tower is not to be called a helicopter landing area, then we need to clarify that in the plan. And I think this is where some of the issue may be arising is, well, what is a helicopter landing area? But maybe you guys would like to just describe some of the types of stuff you do in terms of pest control, into the dock estate, gravel, etc., for those types of infrequent operations, so the panel can understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, you basically sort of put that on the head, really. We operate around the weather, obviously, and being in the Wairarapa, we only get very few calm days of the year that we can do a lot of our work. So when we have those days, we make the best opportunity we can get to do the work. And we work through the whole region, basically, and that involves pest management in the likes of the Tarara Ranges and working for Department of Conservation with hut and track maintenance, and servicing, cell towers and repeaters and things like that. Also with the council, with the regional council, with also pest management control and things like that. And then obviously the wide range of agricultural work we do throughout the region with forestry and farming, basically. Yeah, farming's a big one. So.
Well, I mean, there's the dams on farms. What are they classed as a designated landing area, like an airstrip? I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
I can't sort of understand the ruling.
So agricultural aviation activities are permitted. So a lot of the activity you will do will come under the definition of agricultural aviation under that rule box D. But it's the things that are outside the ag aviation, like surveying.
It's a commercial work.
Yeah, the commercial work, surveying the national grid lines. You will have seen the helicopters surveying the lines. Now, any landing associated with surveying that national grid line is outside the scope. It would require a consent as it's written at the moment.
At the moment, yeah.
If they land beside the line somewhere or whatever. So that's the sort of activity. It's out beyond the agricultural aviation activities. It's those commercial activities and the construction one. And I've raised in my evidence that I consider, and a number of noise experts, acoustic experts agree, that helicopter usage for construction comes under the NZ 6803 for construction noise. So what we're talking there is what would you do? Lifting in a water tank, for instance, into a property would be a construction activity and should come under that construction rule and the construction standard. But it's not clear in the plan, and neither have the officers responded to my raising this issue. But if you agree that construction, helicopters for construction comes under the construction rule, then it should be clear that that's how it's covered. And I deliberately put in the definition of construction from the construction standard, because the interpretation we've had from John Stiles, another acoustic engineer, is that it does include use of helicopters.
The NZ 6803 does.
Yes.
But not 6807.
Well, if what we're saying here is there's a rule for construction.
NZR2.
Yes. And what we're saying is there's no definition in the plan of construction. So we tried to say, well, what construction in this rule, what are you including? But the rule refers to this S2, which refers to 6803. So I've taken the definition from 6803 for construction as being the most appropriate determinant of what is construction.
Have you sought a definition of construction in the plan?
No, wasn't picked up at the time that the submission was done, which was a prior executive officer, Mr. Nelson. So it hasn't been sought, and I don't know if anyone else has sought it through the plan.
With the reference to, no, there was no reference to, but you've sought reference to 6802.
Well, 6803 is referred to in standard 3.
Yes, it is.
So your plan, and that's why I'm saying I've referred to 6803 definition by default because it's an S2.
We might have some questions, Mr. Arden, on that later.
So what other councils have done, in Gore, for instance, and actually we were in mediation last week at the Environment Court on Mackenzie District Plan on the specific issue, and the council having accepted that the construction type activities, especially for infrastructure, are provided for as a permitted activity as part of the construction activity.
Yeah, well, as an example, we did Transmission Gully. We did over 700 holes there, getting samples out of each hole. And if you'd had to have a consent for each hole, holy smokes, it's going to cost a hell of a lot more. That's construction.
Yes.
And you do a lot of lifting for construction?
Well, we had to fly the drill rigs of.
So is there within the rules, the box where the rules are exempt, so the following exempt.
Yeah.
Is that where you would see this going? And perhaps if you used your example of carrying a water tank into a farm, I would interpret that as agriculture.
Well, it mightn't be a farm.
But or if you were taking a water tank up to a hut up in the conservation area, I would.
So
That's conservation. To me, you're arguing about civil construction, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
That's what's not contained in here, and perhaps that's where we.
Yes. I think the addition of the conservation in the box, as has been recommended in the summary, will actually cover all the stuff in the conservation estate, including tracking and the hut maintenance, all that. I think that's captured.
Anything on a farm's captured.
Anything on a farm's captured. What's not captured is the civil construction and the surveying type activities of the national grid. The other type of activity that's not captured is if they're transporting hunters out into the Rohinis.
So could that, going under conservation activities, and I'm thinking pest control, which includes taking hunters out to, would that come under conservation activities?
I wouldn't think taking
Very loose.
hunters out would come under conservation.
Recreational.
That's recreational.
Yeah.
Yes.
Um,
But see, like you've got these cell phone sites where we've got to fly all the concrete,
Yeah.
you know, and we've got lots of them to do.
Was
but that's a construction.
so that could, so that I'm just trying to get for me in my head, I was thinking about the telcos and the cell towers, etc. So that to me, and I guess my question to you is, that would be classified as construction in your industry with doing that.
But going up to survey or check a fault is not construction.
Right. Okay.
So your surveying work is not construction if you look at that definition of construction. So there's these sort of little bundles of things around, and it's how we make sure, are we actually going to provide for these in the plan? If we do, then we've got to make sure we've got the mechanism right for them.
Dawn might get a call after a big wind goes through and say there's a line, which is the line going from Master to Ori through to Tanui. That always goes out. He gets called. Now go and fly that line. Is that construction or is that just finding a fault?
Yeah, well, that's survey.
Because
yeah.
on through, but it's not a civil defence matter.
No.
So it's not it's not like
It's an infrastructure.
cyclone bowler or anything like that. It's just like we got to go and find a fault because they haven't got power out there.
But you don't want to wait for a consent to do that.
No, well, I mean, it might be the weekend guarantee.
I think based on what we've heard from Mr. Nelson, Mr. Rainey and Mr. Williams, there's a general appetite from the panel to try and get a solution to this. The best forum to do that is through Lynette, talking to Katie, and coming up with, on a without prejudice basis, particularly if there's no agreement, but first and foremost, a drafting exercise But more importantly, if there is agreement for that to be recorded in a joint witness statement.
Yeah, happy to do that.
And if I can just be of assistance, because we had we had this morning. So it's a combination of the definition of landing area,
Mhm.
the rule box, and it looks like D and E do a lot of the, excuse the pun, the heavy lifting already. But there might, and L, sorry, not D and E, D and L.
DNL.
Then there's rule 8,
Yes,
which uses the term landing areas. There's this concept of limited duration also. And there's rule 1 also, which is the default permitted activity rule.
yes.
So
Sorry.
I can't remember the limited duration.
Oh, that's in D in the rule box.
Yes, it's also in S3, I think, and on the cross plans. But so all of those provisions need to talk to each other. And at the moment, I just get the feeling that they're not quite doing that. The intention's reasonably clear. So I think we could talk for hours about it in the hearing, and I think it's fair. The most you're going to get the most mileage is from you talking to Katie.
So in the report, it said in the summary report that the R8 doesn't apply to occasional landing helicopter in a paddock or other site not designed or intended for helicopters. Now, my interpretation is different from that. So it's about, if we accept in principle that we want to permit these things, what is the best, clearest way of providing for them?
How do they do it for things like heli skiing down in Queenstown? Because this goes on every winter.
That's a Department of Conservation. Basically, you get a landing permit, like Bill and I both got landing permits or a concession to land hunters in certain huts in the hills.
And
So we pay an annual fee for that, plus we pay a per person fee.
And because there's a provision in the RMA that the conservation estate is actually outside of the activity in the conservation estate is provided
It's sort of
for.
there.
So that's how it's done.
Everyone's here, yeah.
But what we're finding, like in Mackenzie, where we were last week, they're doing a lot of the ZIP program, the Zero Invasive Predator program, has mainly been in the conservation estate, but it's now moving into private land. So the provisions that provide for the conservation estate don't apply to private land. So we need to be clear.
Which is up here in the.
So basically we're gonna write down who they are, bang, there they are, and then at the end of every quarter, Department of Conservation send us this is who how many 100 people we've flown in, then boom, we get charged for it.
Right, so it's similar to down south, but it's a similar.
It's exactly the same. It's Department of Conservation.
So are there any other activities that we haven't talked about that you think would be a concern that you want to make sure are covered?
Oh, yeah.
We've covered the gambit, Ray?
Are you clear, Ms. Wolf, and are you clear, Katie, as to?
I'm clear.
Yeah, the other, I talked about the rule box, the rule 1, rule 8, the definition. S2 in terms of construction is relevant too, but not directly relevant. It's more relevant to the bird scaring devices and stuff. But you might want to consider the degree you can rely on the term construction from that standard.
Yes, and that'll be a decision you might want to but I can certainly I know John Stiles, and I assume some of you are familiar with John Stiles, has in Gore has said, look, construction's covered by that.
Yeah, it'd be nice to just have this as a discussion between you and Katie, but we need to bring in Mr. Arden and Mr. Stiles. We could do that. I'm just conscious that Mr. Stiles hasn't given evidence.
No.
Whereas Mr. Arden has.
Yes.
So I'm sure there's a drafting solution here somewhere, but the sequence would be for you to meet first and then decide whether you're in agreement. If you are, to provide a joint witness statement which has the track change wording proposed and a section 32AA signed by both of you.
Right. Any date that you want that?
We'll give that to you in a moment. That's for the helicopter landing.
Yep,
Still need for your other clients, the track change request that
I can do
and
that.
you're going to give us the court case.
Yes.
Yes. Was that a?
Marlborough.
The frost ban.
That's the frost ban.
It was an actual direction from the court, was it?
Well, they amended the rules in the plan and included that.
Okay. If you can't agree, then the joint witness statement should identify the areas in which you do agree, particularly say on a without prejudice drafting assistance, and then the reasons why you disagree on all or some matters. Well, because it's so important, we're going to give you as much time, well, not as much time as you can, but generally what happens is the officers have to report back within 3 weeks of the close of the hearing. So we'd probably need this to happen within 2 weeks of the hearing adjournment.
Okay.
I know we've got Easter and that coming up, so we might have to take that into account. So they are non-working days and.
No, I'm moving house. That's all right. We'll work it in.
Yeah. We may define that time period with more detail with Mr. Horrell at the end of today's session.
Okay. And I can go and get contact details.
From Ruth.
That's anything. Thank you all for your time. It's actually been really, really useful for us here. And
Thank you.
yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you park your helicopter just
I was just going to say, you need to fly now, don't you? No pun intended.
Thanks, Ray.
Okay, so we will now. Do we have rail coming in at 2:45? Oh, so that's still 3:50.
NZTA.
So NZTA, we've just had notification that Mr. Talbot is in a workshop and he needs to keep his 3 p.m. time slot. So we will now adjourn until 3 p.m.